In this episode, we're going to talk about something that sounds administrative but is actually a major security control: keeping the policy corpus current by retiring or refreshing policies systematically. A policy corpus is simply the full collection of policy documents, standards, procedures, and guidelines that define how an organization expects work to be done safely. Over time, every organization accumulates documents that were written for old systems, old threats, old workflows, or old leadership priorities. And when those documents remain in place, they create confusion and risk. People do not usually ignore policies because they hate rules. They ignore policies because the policy set becomes inconsistent, outdated, and hard to interpret quickly under real pressure. When that happens, teams choose the path that seems practical, and practical sometimes means unsafe. Retiring and refreshing policies is the discipline of clearing out what no longer serves the organization and updating what still matters so the rules remain credible, usable, and aligned with guiding principles. For brand new learners, this matters because governance is not only about writing strong rules. It is about maintaining a trustworthy rule system over time. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A current policy corpus is a safety advantage because it reduces ambiguity at the exact moments when ambiguity is most dangerous. If a team needs to make a decision during an incident, they cannot spend time debating which policy version applies or whether an old standard is still valid. If an engineer is designing a system, they need guidance that reflects current architecture and current risk priorities, not requirements written for technology that no longer exists. An outdated corpus creates a kind of background noise where every document is suspect. And when every document is suspect, compliance becomes a negotiation rather than an expectation. That negotiation slows work and increases risk because people will interpret requirements differently, and attackers benefit from inconsistent defenses. A systematic retirement and refresh approach protects the integrity of governance by ensuring the corpus remains coherent. Coherence here means that policies do not contradict each other, definitions remain consistent, and supporting procedures match real workflows. When coherence is preserved, policies feel like a system, and systems are easier to trust and follow than piles of documents. This is why keeping the corpus current is not a clerical task. It is a risk management task. Retiring policies is not the same thing as deleting history. And that distinction is important because organizations often need records of what standards existed in the past. Retirement is the act of formally ending a policy's active authority, meaning people are no longer expected to follow it as a current requirement. A retired policy may still be archived for reference, audits, or legal reasons, but it should be clearly marked as inactive so it cannot be confused with current guidance. Refreshing policies is the act of updating them, either by revising content, clarifying language, adjusting scope, or aligning the policy with new operational realities and new threat understanding. Both retirement and refresh are part of lifecycle governance because policies should not live forever unchanged. A beginner misunderstanding is to assume that policy updates are rare, dramatic events, but in mature programs, refresh is a normal maintenance activity. Another misunderstanding is to think retirement is admitting failure, but retirement is often a sign of maturity because it shows the organization is willing to remove outdated controls instead of letting them quietly distort behavior. Systematic maintenance is what keeps governance from becoming cluttered and untrusted. To retire or refresh systematically, you need criteria because otherwise decisions become subjective and political. Criteria should be tied to guiding principles and operational reality, because the goal is to keep what still serves the intended outcomes and remove what does not. Common criteria include whether the policy aligns with current organizational structure, whether it aligns with current technology and workflows, whether it reflects current risk priorities, and whether it is still measurable and enforceable. Another criterion is usage, meaning whether people actually rely on the policy for decisions. But usage should be interpreted carefully. A policy might be in use because it is irrelevant, which suggests retirement, or it might be unused because it is confusing or hard to find, which suggests refresh and better communication. Auditing findings are often strong inputs here, because audits reveal where drift and gaps exist and which policies are causing repeated confusion. Exceptions data is another input, because frequent exceptions may signal a policy that is unrealistic and needs refresh, or a policy that is obsolete and should be retired. When criteria are clear, policy maintenance becomes a disciplined process rather than a series of reactive edits. Systematic refresh also requires a controlled approach to updating, because uncontrolled updates create new confusion that undermines trust. When a policy is refreshed, the changes should be traceable, meaning stakeholders can understand what changed and why. This does not require long explanations, but it does require enough transparency that people do not feel surprised by shifting expectations. Refresh should also consider the policy's dependencies, because a policy rarely stands alone. If you refresh a policy's definitions, you may need to refresh related standards, procedures, and guidelines that use those terms, or else the corpus becomes inconsistent. If you refresh a requirement, you may need to refresh the procedure that implements it, or the requirement becomes harder to follow. This is why policy maintenance is a system problem rather than a document problem. Systematic refresh treats the corpus like a network where changes propagate intentionally, rather than like a shelf where one book can be edited in isolation. When this propagation is managed well, refresh improves clarity. When it is unmanaged, refresh creates chaos and resistance. Retirement must be handled with just as much care, because retiring a policy can remove protections if it is done without replacement or without understanding the outcome it supported. The key is to retire the document while preserving the principle and the outcome if the outcome still matters. Sometimes retirement happens because the outcome is no longer relevant, such as when a technology is no longer used, but often the outcome remains important and only the policy expression is outdated. In that case, retirement should be paired with replacement, such as a refreshed policy that reflects new architecture or a consolidated policy that merges overlapping requirements. Retirement should also include communication so stakeholders know what is no longer active and what to use instead. Without clear communication, people may continue following old requirements out of habit, creating unnecessary burden, or they may stop following any guidance because they are confused. Systematic retirement makes the transition clear so behavior changes cleanly. In security, clean transitions matter because messy transitions create gaps, and gaps are where risk grows. Keeping the corpus current also depends on cadence, because without regular review cycles, policies become outdated silently. A systematic program defines review intervals based on how quickly an area changes, with faster review for fast-moving domains and slower review for stable ones. Cadence is not only about scheduled review. It is also about triggers that prompt review, such as major architecture changes, new regulatory obligations, significant incidents, or repeated exceptions. When triggers are defined, the organization can respond quickly to material change without rewriting everything constantly. This balance between cadence and triggers keeps the corpus both stable and responsive. Stability matters because people need time to build habits around requirements, and responsiveness matters because outdated requirements cause drift. A well-governed corpus feels predictable, meaning people know when policies are reviewed and how changes are introduced. Predictability reduces resistance because it reduces surprise, and surprise is a major driver of informal workarounds. Cadence is therefore a behavior-shaping tool, not just a calendar entry. Ownership is equally critical in retirement and refresh, because without ownership, policies accumulate like abandoned projects. Ownership ensures someone is responsible for deciding whether a policy is still needed, still accurate, and still aligned with principles. Ownership also ensures someone is responsible for coordinating changes with stakeholders, because policy maintenance should not be done in isolation. In practice, policy owners should track known issues, audit findings, exception trends, and adoption indicators so they can prioritize what to refresh first. Ownership also includes coordinating with process owners, because procedures and operational practices often need adjustment when policies change. If owners are unclear or overloaded, refresh becomes delayed, and outdated policies remain active longer than they should. That delay is a governance risk because it increases the chance of drift, inconsistent enforcement, and loss of trust. Systematic maintenance depends on a stable assignment of responsibility and a process for ownership transitions when people change roles. Without that, the corpus becomes a historical artifact rather than a living system. Measured accountability supports retirement and refresh by providing evidence about what is working and what is not. If adoption indicators show that a policy's process is rarely used, that is a signal that either the policy is irrelevant or the process is too burdensome or unclear. If compliance indicators show persistent gaps, that is a signal that the policy may be unrealistic, undersupported, or poorly defined. If exception indicators show repeated deviations, that is a signal that either the policy needs refinement or the organization needs investment to meet it. Measurement turns policy maintenance into decision-making rather than guesswork, because it shows where the corpus is failing to drive behavior and where it is producing intended outcomes. Measurement also helps you avoid the trap of refreshing policies that are not high impact, simply because they are easy to edit. In security, effort should be allocated where risk reduction is greatest. Indicators help you focus maintenance on the parts of the corpus that matter most for outcomes. When measurement drives refresh and retirement, the corpus becomes more aligned with real risk rather than with administrative habits. A practical but often overlooked element of keeping the corpus current is controlling discoverability and version clarity, because a policy is only useful if people can find the current version quickly. If old versions remain easy to access without clear labeling, people will accidentally use them, especially under pressure. Systematic maintenance, therefore, includes ensuring that active policies are clearly identified, outdated policies are clearly marked as inactive, and links between policies and supporting procedures are current. This reduces the chance that teams follow retired guidance or fail audits because they referenced the wrong document. It also reduces rework because teams do not waste time debating which policy applies. Discoverability is not just a documentation issue. It is a control effectiveness issue because confusion creates inconsistency. For beginners, it helps to realize that governance is an interface between humans and expectations, and the interface must be usable to be effective. Keeping the interface clean, current, and obvious is part of security work. Another important part of systematic refresh is consolidating, because policy corpuses often grow through accumulation rather than design. Overlapping policies create contradictory requirements, duplicate definitions, and inconsistent enforcement, which is a fast path to distrust. Consolidation means identifying where multiple documents are expressing the same principle or addressing the same risk and combining them into clearer, more coherent guidance. Consolidation can also mean separating policy, standards, procedures, and guidelines more cleanly so each document type does its intended job. When consolidation occurs, the corpus becomes smaller and clearer, which increases the chance that people will actually use it. Smaller is not always better, but clearer is always better, and consolidation tends to improve clarity when done thoughtfully. Consolidation should be guided by principles so the organization does not accidentally drop important protections while trying to simplify. Done well, consolidation reduces cognitive load and makes governance more scalable. That scalability is part of what keeps policies from becoming brittle as organizations grow. As we close, retiring or refreshing policies systematically is how you keep the policy corpus credible, coherent, and aligned with reality, which is what makes governance effective under real pressure. Systematic maintenance uses clear criteria to decide what should be retired, refreshed, or replaced, and it treats policies as living controls connected to standards, procedures, and guidelines. Ownership ensures someone is responsible for ongoing health. Cadence and triggers ensure drift is detected in time, and measured accountability provides evidence that guides decisions. Retirement ends the authority of outdated documents while preserving necessary outcomes through replacement or consolidation, and refresh updates expectations while managing dependencies and communication. The result is a corpus that people can trust, find, and apply, which reduces ambiguity and reduces workarounds. For exam thinking, mature governance is demonstrated through life cycle management, coherence, and continuous improvement, not just through the existence of documents. When the corpus is current, The organization moves faster with less confusion and less risk, because people are guided by rules that reflect the world they actually live in. That is what durable policy governance looks like, and it is a powerful contributor to real security outcomes.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.